some parts of Israel it's snowing. But really, it's the first time this year that it's really freezing. But when I say it's freezing, it's around 50, uh, talking about it's 57 degrees. But that's freezing in Israeli terms. So I guess by you it's a bit lower than
Yeah, we were
that.
at negative 35 a couple weeks ago.
Oh, that's fantastic. I used to live in Wisconsin, and we would get those temperatures. Actually, we were there at 84, and we came at September 84, and horrible. Oh, okay. Is the internet now better? I uh I changed the router. Okay, I hope now everything is gonna be fine. Let's hear some fine music. This is very suitable for this is I mean, when it's freezing outside, this is what I like to hear. Just a moment. Go.
אבא, נעליים מהמיטה שלי.
Okay, nothing like Sibelius. I love it. It's amazing music. Okay, so let's recall where we concluded last week. Anyone remember? Anyone? Did we
We
discuss?
were just
Yeah,
finishing up the Hungarian Jews
yeah,
during
right.
the
Okay.
split.
Oh, yeah. Okay, okay, okay. Right, thank you. So we discussed again, as Jordan mentioned, the Hungarian reality of a complete and all-out war between the Orthodox and non-Orthodox sections, uh, to a point where you have homiletics and sermons calling non-Orthodox Jews or comparing them to non-Jews at all, sanctions on those who were not part of the Orthodox communities, complete negation of any possibility of cooperation between the congregations. It was clear that the Orthodox and non-Orthodox communities in Hungary did not want to be together. And as I said, that is despite the fact that the actual differences between the Orthodox and non-Orthodox congregations when it comes to celebrating their Jewish life and ideologies within the public sphere wasn't that great, as opposed to Germany, where you did have quite a striking difference between the Orthodox communities and non-Orthodox communities, specifically regarding questions of halacha in the public sphere, and still you could see them, all of the German Jewish communities partaking in the same Gemeindes, the same institutions, the same communal establishments. They did not think that they have to separate in a complete and formal way. Now, I must admit that this depiction of German Jewry isn't completely accurate. And I want to dedicate our discussion today to an exception general to that general rule. Just a moment. My router here. Okay, so uh, now this is a bit funny to discuss because within at least Israeli circles nowadays, when you discuss German Orthodoxy, the first figure to come to mind is Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, or Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. Now, Rabbi Hirsch, who was a Jew from Frankfurt, a very prolific Jew, a very learned rabbi, an ideologue. Uh, Despite the fact that he was a very prominent German rabbi, he was in fact a minority within the Orthodox circles of his time. And I need to go into this in that is to say that the model that Rabbi Hirsch attempted to create in Germany did not, in fact, spread outside of the outskirts of Frankfurt, his hometown. Whereas in all of the other, almost all of the other Orthodox communities in Germany, their policies were completely the opposite. Now, we must understand what exactly Rabbi Hirsch stood for. At quite an early age, Rabbi Hirsch was obsessed with what he perceived as a very problematic situation of PR that the Orthodox communities and Orthodox faith is faced by, specifically with young and enlightened youth in Germany. That is, he understood, and I think we must give him credit for that because his diagnosis was quite accurate, that the Orthodox way of life is losing completely within the youth and within the more younger parts of the Jewish society. The reason for that is that for many people, the idea of being clinging to a faith to begin with, and specifically to the Jewish faith, was in fact something that restrains you and holds you back in your efforts when it comes to your career and when it comes to the possibilities of assimilating within the general German community, because the German society, generally speaking, was very anti-Semitic, and Jews did not find themselves part of the Jewish community when they attempted to keep their own traditional beliefs, behaviors, and observance to the religious rituals. It was much easier to assimilate culturally and eventually even physically to the German society rather than be linked to all of these anachronistic forms of life as they were perceived in the German society and specifically in the Jewish circles. Now, reform was cool, okay? I'm not saying that nowadays it's not cool, but it was the hype, okay? If I can use very postmodern words, the idea of recreating one's religious beliefs in a form that allows them to be part of the German society, to be part of the German elites without reinventing yourself, without trying to be someone you aren't. The idea was quite charming to many individuals, specifically those in their early stages of their careers and before they even began to run their families and to establish their status within the Jewish community. Because people ask themselves, why would I even want to be part of this ancient tradition if I deem it completely irrelevant to modern times? So, according to Rav Hirsch's perspective, the major problem here was a marketing problem. That is, if you look old-fashioned, if you sound old-fashioned, if the ideals you stand for are not popular, it will be extremely difficult to express yourself and to try to market yourself to the general public as something that isn't traditionalist in the worst form ever. So, Hirsch began several campaigns of trying to target the youngsters of the Jewish community and to allow them to have a new peek into what Jewish ideals and Jewish observance stands for. Now, he did so by adopting a very popular form of speech and of literature. He began composing apologetic works, that is, works that identify the up-to-date sentiments on Judaism, and he actually allowed the people to read debates that he composed where the ideological claims and theological claims of non-observant Jews were crystal clear and were presented in a very respectful way. That is, what he attempted was to do, portray the dialogues that are supposed to happen, are supposed to be part of the public sphere, the dialogues between observant and non-observant Jews, with the utmost respect to those who do not adhere to the commandments as he and others believe they should. Now, when you write and publish these positions from an Orthodox perspective, but you do permit these ideas to be part of the dialogue, it reflects a very powerful position. That is, we tend to, sometimes when we take part in ideological debates, we tend to dwarf our opponents. We tend to uh, 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 we tend to it's like to not to underestimate, but to uh, uh, we tend to mock our opponents. We tend to attribute them very stupid ideas. We tend to portray them as illogical. And usually, when you see ideological debates, it's very difficult to see them in a fair perspective, that is, in a real life situation where you hear rational positions and arguments coming from both sides of the aisle, and refreshing way of having a debate, it does many times help to promote your ideas and to show that you're not afraid to put them under scrutiny. For example, by the way, that was the charm Charlie Kirk had. Okay, you can like what he stood for, you cannot, or dislike what he stood for, but you can't take from him his bravery and his ability to hear very wrong arguments from his opponents. I'm saying wrong because it's quite clear that he believed that they are incorrect, to say the least, but still he tended to treat the ideas and not the people who are presenting the ideas. That is, he was, at least that was his outspoken ideology. He believed in sincere debates. He allowed people to say what they had to say. He was against the cancel culture. He didn't say, "How dare you speak like this? You're unethical. You are genocidal. You are this. You are that." That wasn't his way of debating. His way of debating was, let's wrestle with ideas. Let's wrestle with logic. Let's wrestle with facts. Now, some would say that I'm not trying to praise his ideas. I do think that the way he chose uh, uh, to allow everyone to participate in this ideological debate with freedom and with a almost a sanctuary of ideas and of a variety of ideologies that can all stay under one roof and can debate and can discuss their ideology without name calling and without shaming and without tagging people with stereotypes, that was very powerful. That was indeed something that gave him millions and millions of followers because they saw a very sincere and brave individual that allows himself to partake in debates without being offended. Now, I'm not comparing Rav Hirsch to Charlie Kirk, but essentially they did the same thing. That Rav Hirsch said, I'm not afraid to actually discuss these very difficult questions. Now, this is the first time ever within German Orthodoxy where you see some questions and some positions who would be deemed heretic by other figures, be it lay people, be it rabbinic authorities, ideas that are heretic, that could be considered as completely out of the borders of what being a Jew should look like. And Rav Hirsch expressed these ideas, these arguments out loud, and he debated them. Now, you can see this in one of his earliest works named Igrot Tzafun. In fact, this work was composed to begin with because a publishing house in Germany refused to publish his magnum opus. Rav Hirsch's magnum opus is called Chorev. I'll speak about that book in a moment, but it's a very lengthy book. It's, I mean, a large chunk of paper there. Book, no publishing house agreed to publish it because they said it's too long, no one will read it. Just first of all, prove to us that you have a following focus group, that someone that prove to us that you're sellable, that we should invest in your books because otherwise we're gonna lose a hand and a leg. So Rav Hirsch did so. He published this very short booklet containing letters, supposedly part of a correspondence between two youngsters, one an Orthodox observant Jew, and the other an enlightened, not only non-Orthodox, but in fact a Jew that is debating whether to continue within the Jewish path or just, to be part of the Jewish community in society, but without any religious obligations and any commandments that are part of his life. And this,
Uh,
yeah, sure.
is this the work called The 19 Letters in
Yeah, it
English?
is. The original work was Irgot Safun. The original name is Irgot Safun, but yeah. Uh, the reason it's called Igrot Safun, I must say, is a bit it's a bit puzzling. Apparently, it's because Safun, uh, part of the Seder Pesach, Safun is the part where you hide the afikoman. Now, because these letters were composed allegedly by two youngsters that their names were not published. It was like a pseudonym. So it's these are 19 letters that are not, you cannot attribute them to anyone, despite the fact that Rav Hirsch was debate between Reform Jews and Orthodox Jews became very much part of the public sphere, not in the form of clashes and accusations and fighting over money and power and hierarchy, but rather it was a clean, precise, and very respectful dialogue. between Jewish positions. And Rav Hirsch was aware of the fact that many Jewish youngsters did not share his mindset and his ideology. Yet, despite the fact that the book to how Rav Hirsch allows himself to be part of the German Jewish world and how he believes and considers his opponents within the Jewish world as partners or as foes. Now, Rav Hirsch sought to create a complete chain of unity throughout. He did not like what he was. The reason for that was, according to Rav Hirsch, one of the reasons was that, in fact, instead of fighting an assertive war for their ideology, many in the Orthodox communities were, in fact, focusing on Orthodox interests, okay? And once they got their share from unity, oh, now is the internet okay now?
We
Oh,
keep losing you, so it's like the connection is very unstable.
okay. Now can you hear me? Now is it okay for now?
Okay, but
Uh,
it's very unstable.
yeah. Was I stable for the past 15 minutes?
Uh,
No, it's
so,
important. So?
I think we could understand the main things, but there were a few gaps there.
Okay, I'll try. I'll switch to another. Okay. Is it okay now? Okay. Hope it stays like this. Okay. So, from Rav Hirsch's perspective, Orthodox Jewry was losing. And the reason it was losing, or the reasons it was losing, it was because they did not adapt to modernity on the one hand. And on the other hand, it was because they weren't strict enough and they were not clear enough regarding the boundaries of what Judaism should look like. That is, they did not differentiate themselves enough from the Reform movement. From Rav Hirsch's perspective, being a Reform Jew was in fact getting closer and closer to losing any real connection to the Jewish world. Now, you cannot be part of the same Gemeinde with Reform Jews and expect your own children to adhere to a Jewish lifestyle which is completely different to that of the Reform movement. That is, if you give a hechsher, if you say that being a Reform Jew is okay, and you explicitly do so when you do not differentiate yourself from the Jewish Gemeinde, that is, you say being part of the Gemeinde, being part of the community, but still maintaining a Reform way of life is in fact okay. It's legitimate. It's a valid way of life. So Rav Hirsch asks, well, is it easier to wake up every morning and say Kriyat Shema and put the tefillin? And is it easier to go on Shabbat to the beach or to go on a hike or to stay at home and go to pray? Is it easier to fast on days of fasting? Is it easier to not eat chametz on Passover? Is it easier? And so on and so forth. You get the message. Rav Hirsch says, if you validate the Reform way of life, and you do so de facto, since you do not differentiate yourself when it comes to being part of the Gemeinde, then the message you deliver to your own offspring is being Reform is in fact a legitimate way of life. It's a legitimate form of Judaism. Rav Hirsch says it's not. In fact, Rav Hirsch actually claims that being Reform and being Orthodox in the old style, that is, in the style of the non-modern form, are in fact two sides of the same coin. That is, if one chooses to not observe the laws, the divine laws of the commandments, it is in fact a claim that these commandments are old school. They have no meaning in modern Jewish life. On the other hand, sustaining your Orthodox way of life, but not updating it to any ideological uh, 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 developments and innovations of the 19th century is also, in fact, disregarding the commandments as something of relevance. That is, for the Reform Jew, they put relevance above observance. Whereas for the old school, old-fashioned Orthodox Jews, they put observance above relevance. But they both agree that, in fact, the laws of Judaism are not relevant. Only for one, the fact that they're not relevant means that I'm not obliged to obey them. And for the other, the fact that they're not relevant isn't interesting because who says I have to be relevant? Who says I have to be up to date? Who says the ethical, spiritual norms of modernity are something to be proud of? But in fact, essentially, the Reform Jew and the non-modern Orthodox Jew both perceive the laws of Judaism as something completely irrelevant to modern times. Whereas for Rav Hirsch, it's the opposite way around. Being a modern Jew is in fact being a good Jew. Why is that good? It is because being modern means to embrace meta-historical developments that are delivered by God. Moreover, and here is where I am using some of Hirsch's ideas that you can find in his really fascinating and phenomenal commentary on the five books of Moses, the Pentateuch. Rav Hirsch says the following. Now, this is a paraphrase, but He says essentially this: God gave us the commandments and God gave us the Torah because he wanted us to use this Torah to enlighten humanity. In fact, one of the most important missions of Judaism is to enlighten humanity and to deliver some of the most powerful and important ideals that are derived from the belief in one God, from monotheism. The idea was that we will be advocates for these very profound ideals. Now, one way to achieve the deliverance of these profound ideals would be to have the perfect state, the perfect nation. Because once you crack the code for the perfect nation, everyone will stand in line to learn from your excellence, from your beautiful human experiment. So, when God gave us the Bible, he actually expected us to create the perfect society, the perfect human society. And once this beautiful form, way of life of Jewish sovereignty will be, in fact, showing, enlightening the world with its greatness, all of the other nations will copy us, will follow our footsteps. That's the best case scenario. However, as we all know, best case scenarios never materialize. What actually materializes more likely than not are complications, are instances where people tend not to to behave in their greatest form. And specifically when it comes to nations, well, many nations, once time passes and goes by, they tend to rot into themselves. They tend to implode. Look at all of the greatest empires in history. They imploded. They collapsed into themselves because they became irrelevant. Now, we were sent, the Jewish people were sent to the diaspora by God. That is a given. It's not negotiable. But while many people perceive the diaspora as a punishment, by the way, it's not only many people, it's written very explicitly in the Bible wherever you look and in the Talmudic literature. But put that aside, while some people may perceive the diaspora as a punishment, a divine punishment for wrong misdoings, Rav Hirsch says, while it is a punishment, it is also a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity because it is, or it has the potential of elevating us, the Jewish people, to an even loftier mission than the first one. While the first mission was to create the perfect Jewish state in the land of Israel, while that experiment failed greatly, now we have another mission, an updated mission, and that mission is to spread the light of the ethical and profound Torah to the whole world. It's not like we're trying to convert everyone to Judaism, but what we are trying to do, according to Rav Hirsch, is to show them our greatness, show them our ethical superiority, and thus to expose some of this great light to the whole world. Now, Rav Hirsch will claim, and he says so, you have Christianity and Islam, both are in fact branches of Judaism. And it's undeniable that Christianity and Islam achieved an amazing success that resulted in the fact that more than a half of humanity are in fact monotheists. And not only are they monotheists, but both in Christianity and in Islam, you have a very detailed set of ethical behaviors And these great religions educate and train their followers in the footsteps of our forefathers. Now, of course, you can always have debates. Is Christianity part of Judaism, or is it not a part of Judaism, but rather a branch that created a totally new and distinct set of beliefs? Are Jews and Muslims really sharing a great amount of their ideology? You can always debate that, and it's not like Avhir said, "Yay, let's all be Christians." Of course, it's the opposite way around. But he still insists on the fact that via the Bible, via the Jewish teachings delivered by God, indeed, many nations throughout the world achieved moral enhancement. They became better nations. Now, says Rav Hirsch, this would have never happened if we were not sent to the diaspora. That is, the diaspora has a great byproduct, despite the fact that initially the idea was to punish the Jewish people for their wrongdoings, but still the diaspora has its own upsides. And one of the greatest upsides is that it allows us the opportunity to have a greater impact on the whole world, on the whole demographics. The whole population of the world sees the Jewish people as their neighbors, learns from their beautiful behavior, and thus have a greater appreciation to the one God. That's namely the core argument Rav Hirsch uses in many of his ideas and commentaries. Now, we cannot be messengers of the true God if we ourselves do not adhere to God's commandments. We cannot fulfill our eternal mission to the people, to humanity, if we betray our own traditions and thus undermine the possibility we have of having a positive contribution to human society, because we are confused. We are not sure of our own Jewish identity. It seems as if we are behaving like we want to be other nations, like we want not to have this binding and very strict code of laws with all of its numerous, I would dare even say, endless interpretations throughout history. Many people just don't want to be part of this. Now, Rav Hirsch says the reason they don't want to be part of this is because they don't understand what it means to be a Jew. They don't understand, they don't have a real understanding of what behaving like a Jew means. Now, let me be very clear. It's not that he's claiming that Reform Jews forgot how to be Jewish, whereas Orthodox Jews know exactly what it means. No, Rav Hirsch has this criticism not only to Reform Jews, but also to Orthodox Jews. Those who act according to traditions, they have no idea what they stand for. People who observe kashrut only because their grandmother and grandfather observed kashrut without understanding the inner works of each and every commandment, from Rav Hirsch's perspective, well, in fact, not only aren't they helping in the Jewish mission, but in fact, they're undermining it. And the reason is that this point of view really weakens the Jewish mission, because we are not uh, uh, we are not enthusiastic enough. We are not in true belief of what we stand for. And when you come to someone and try to convince them to adopt your position, but you yourself are not, in fact, completely invested in this position, but you're also looking at other possibilities, well, that will be a very hard case to sell. Okay? You have to be completely devoted to Jewish tradition, according to Rav Hirsch, in order to have any impact. So, funny as it may be, in fact, from Rav Hirsch's perspective, he creates this imaginary coalition of Reform and Orthodox Jews who do not adhere to the strictest forms of the Orthodox community, but rather prefer to stay part of the Gemeinde, despite the fact that this Gemeinde, that this community still has liberal and non-Orthodox components in it. So, what does Rav Hirsch do? He does exactly what you expected him to do. He creates a separate community. He creates a distinct community called Adat Yeshurun, and this community has no financial and institutional ties with the German Jewish community in general. Now, this idea, while I guess some people may relate to it, whereas others may think it's completely irrelevant and I would even say offensive, okay, it's legitimate. Rav Hirsch knows that not many people agree with him, but the thing is that really it wasn't that popular. Now, like in real life, in Judaism, you uh, hypes and you have some ideologies that tend to be more attractive than others each and every decade or several years. Now, Rav Hirsch, while his ideas really sound great on paper, and he was very persuasive, he was a charismatic and rabbinic scholar with a lot of weight. However, he was criticized in real time by some of the greatest leaders of German Jewry. Moreover, this criticism also immigrated to the far Eastern European Jewish communities. That is, in Poland and in Lithuania, people began to criticize Rav Hirsch. Now, the criticism came from two major reasons. One of them is the fact that Rav Yitzchak Halevi Bamberger, he was rabbi of Mecklenburg, a city in Prussia, in Eastern Germany nowadays. Rav Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg completely disagreed with the ideas by Rav Hirsch. Moreover, he was not the only one. We also have the Natziv of Volozhin, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, head of the Volozhin Yeshiva, considered by many as the mother of all yeshivot, modern yeshivot as we know them. He also claimed that the ideas that Rav Hirsch was promoting were in fact destructive. They are creating havoc in the Jewish community. I will even cite him. It is like stabbing the nation with swords again and again. Why is it so severe? Why is it so tragic? According to by Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Natziv of Volozhin, the reason is because Rav Hirsch completely mixed up the greatest ideals of the Jewish community. And one of the most important ideals of Jewish communities, according to the Natziv, is something that Rav Hirsch completely neglected. And had he not neglected this ideal, well, he wouldn't have reached these very problematic conclusions, which he did. And specifically, according to by Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin of Volozhin, one of the most important aspects of Jewish life, of the Jewish community, is its unity. Now, real life is never about living the dream and the ideal. I'm sorry for all of those of you who I'm now crushing their dreams and their aspirations. But speaking from someone who has a family, thank God, and has a work, thank God, everything's okay, thank God. But life is full of compromising. Now, I know it sounds very not romantic, and it sounds quite traumatic, but life is never between good and bad. Life is never between choosing the best, most sparkling uh, uh, option as opposed to other dark and horrific options. Because if that was life, then life was so easy. Life would have been so easy if every decision you had to take was crystal clear and easy. But it's not. You never know what's waiting just around the corner. You never know what are the implications of each and every decision you make. You never know what is the best dream to pursue. You always have to compromise. You never get what everything you wanted. That's that's they live happily ever and after. Yeah, that's in fairy tales. Okay, and reality is much more difficult. Now, one would say it's difficult. Others would say reality is much more interesting. Because, being Cinderella and then living happily ever after is really a long time. It's a really long time. And it's quite boring. It's quite boring to live your days day after day after day without any challenges, without any promotions, without any dreams that you may or may not fulfill, without any grails you aspire to achieve. Now, just today, I had a talk with one of my PhD students. Great guy. And he told me that he was very frustrated with the fact that he is trying to publish an academic paper. But again and again, he receives negative responses. He receives that the reviewers thought that his work isn't publishable. And it's frustrating. Now, I told him, listen, it's frustrating. And I can tell you that because I get much more letters of rejection than you do, because I submit more. Everyone in the academic world knows that you have to live with rejections. And I'll be honest, it doesn't get easy. It gets easier. Okay? The first 5 rejection letters you get are very frustrating. However, once you get 50 or so, I stopped counting, but I guess I got at least 50 letters of rejection, if not more than that. Well, okay, I'll try again tomorrow. What can I do? I can't let it rule and ruin my life. I have to learn how to live with it. So I told him, listen, after you get so many rejections, just think of the joy that you get when suddenly, eventually, your paper gets published. That's so beautiful. It's so powerful. But had you not been rejected for 5 or 6 or 7 times earlier, then the dopamine, the happiness, the great achievement wouldn't be that sweet. Okay, now I'm not trying to idealize letters of rejection. Okay, I would prefer not getting any whatsoever. I would prefer all my papers to be appraised and praised for their greatness and for their powerful messages and for their beautiful language and ideas. However, I live in reality, and in reality, Things don't work like that. You win some, you lose some, okay? And you have to get used to it. Now, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin says to Rav Hirsch, listen, you where do you think you're living in? You think that you can achieve ethical excellence, religious excellence. You think that you can be in a good relationship, allegedly, with God by alienating those who do not observe the halacha, by not being part of the Jewish community in general? Well, what you are doing is that you are giving more credit to some ideals and discrediting other ideals of the Jewish life. That is, okay, you adhere to the commandments, you observe the Shabbat, you observe Kashrut. Okay, that's beautiful, that's great. But you're throwing to the garbage can the ideal of Jewish unity and the ideal of Jews having the same fate and being a great family. When someone has problems in the family, when one does not get together or get along with their siblings, okay, sometimes in very severe situations, you cut them off. You say, okay, we're not part of the family anymore. I don't know if your sibling murdered someone or robbed them in broad daylight, or I don't know what. Okay, I don't want to be part of that family anymore. I don't want to be part of their life, and I don't want them to be part of my life. Okay, it happens. But in 99% of conflicts and dilemmas, the idea of cutting a branch from the tree, the idea of completely detaching oneself from one's own family is not a proportionate solution. It's in fact overkill. And in some instances, overkill is not a blessing. Okay? If you're trying to sell a product and you're trying too hard, well, what are the stakes? Either you succeed or you don't succeed. Okay, it's a product. You sold it, you didn't sell it. But you don't have too many family members to begin with. If you detach yourself from your own family, that's a one-way ticket. You don't have other families waiting for you. You have one family, each and every one of us. We have one family. If we are not part of that family, we are not in a familial situation. So, a vast majority of Eastern European rabbis told Rav Hirsch, listen, your solution is not a good solution. Okay, you're trying to detach yourself from those Jews who do not observe because you believe it will harm your youngsters, because you believe you are selling some of your ideals in order to be part of this Gemeinde. But let's look at it the other way around. By detaching yourself from the major community, you are also selling some of your ideals. The major ideal of the Jewish people being a unified nation under the providence of God is abandoned once you just turn away from your own brethren. Once you say, I'm not part of this Jewish community, that's also harmful. And that's also a decision you took that takes its toll. No decision is implication free. That doesn't exist in this world. You always have implications to your actions. And your actions, of Hirsch, by attempting to create a detached community, by the way, he called it Adat Yeshurun, it's quite an ironic name. I'll talk about it in a moment. That decision is in fact harmful and even lethal to the big ideal of a unified nation. Let's talk about the name Adat Yeshurun. The word Yeshurun in some Talmudic, actually, it's a biblical word. It's in it's in Deuteronomy. ויהי בישורון מלך ויתאסף ראשי עם יחד שבטי ישראל. That is, the verse says explicitly, when is God king? ויהי בישורון מלך ויתאסף ראשי עם יחד שבטי ישראל, when all of the tribes of Israel are together. So in fact, the verse just actually says that once all of the tribes of Israel are unified, are together, that is when the divine kingdom is present, or it is practiced. I'm not exactly sure how I would phrase that, but God is king of the Jewish people when the Jewish people are together. That's essentially what the verse says. Now, by choosing the name Adat Yeshurun, a name Yeshurun, which is very, very much connected to the idea of a unified nation, well, that's kind of ironic, isn't it? You choose this name in order to describe a community that detached itself from all of the other parts of the Jewish nation. And you also have the chutzpah to call yourself Adat Yeshurun. I am the congregation of Yeshurun, the congregation of the ideal of a unified nation. That's a bit ironic. I mean, I guess one could say that it seems a bit tricky to use this word. Let's hear a song because I see where we're getting a bit tired. I'm also tired. I'm sorry, I didn't get a good sleep last night, but let's hear something. Any recommendations for a song? Oh, I do have one. Just a moment. It's actually a song exactly about this. It's a song by the late Arik Einstein, great Israeli singer. Just a moment. Okay, here. Let's see this.
You don't need a second job. You just need to know these AI tools.
Whatever.
So
בלשונות רבות מספור דיברנו.
Oh my God, it's horrible. That's not. I don't know who the singer is, but we have to hear their. No. That's Arik Einstein. That's Miki Gavrielov, and that's Judah Polike in the. This guy on the right, he was responsible for the lyrics. The guy in the middle was responsible for the melody, and this is the singer, Arik Einstein.
וזה את זה כמעט בכלל שלא הכרנו ומקומות רבים מאוד עזבנו ורק מקום אחד רצינו ואהבנו ומקומות רבים מאוד עזבנו ואל הארץ, אל הארץ באנו ונמשכת שיירה רחוקים כבר היוצאים, ניכרים בחלוצים שעמלו עבדו בפרק מלראות את סוף הדרך ועכשיו עוברים אנחנו לא שקטנו ולא נחנו לא ימשיכו בלעדינו זוהי הרפתקת חיינו ארצות באל הישימון הלכנו, מקצות ערב מרוסיה ופולניה, הדלקנו אור גם בדימונה, גם בדגניה. מקצות ערב מרוסיה ופולניה, הדלקנו אור גם בדימונה, גם בדגניה. ומכל הגלויות ומכל הבעיות, עם נוצר בארץ קמה ושפה אשר נרדמה, שוב התחילה מתעוררת ומדברת ומדברת. מסביב יהום הסער רב הקושי והצער, אבל יש על מה לשמוח, יש עוד אומץ, יש עוד כוח. איך ישראל צומחת מסביבנו, היא חזקה יותר מכל חסרונותינו, וגם הנגב עוד יהיה פורח, ועוד נדאג שהזקן יהיה שמח. וגם הנגב עוד יהיה פורח, ועוד נדאג שהזקן יהיה שמח. ומכל הגלויות ועם כל הבעיות, מסביב יהום הסער בקושי והצער, אבל יש על מה לשמוח, יש עוד אומץ, יש עוד כוח, ונמשכת שיירה מן המאה שעברה. רחוקים כבר היוצאים, ניכרים בחלוצים, שעמלו עבדו בפרק בלי לראות את סוף הדרך. ועכשיו אומרים אנחנו לא שקטנו ולא נחנו, לא ימשיכו בלעדינו, זוהי הרפתקת חיינו.
איזה שיר מדהים. What a beautiful song. It's a song actually describing the... Did you hear the song? Yeah, great. Okay. A song describing the caravans of Jews coming from throughout the world to the land of Israel. Oh, just a moment. Oops. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so the thing is that Rav Hirsch was very, very charismatic. And he was such an important author. And also his movement, the movement he created, was very powerful because it elevated the image of a very successful Jew who is both, or I would say, I can describe it by the following. The Jew that Rav Hirsch envisioned has two firm legs. One leg planted in the Torah world, that is a complete and undeniable devotion without any restrictions to the words of God as they are delivered in the Torah and the commandments, whereas that individual also has a very powerful standing in the modern world with modern ethics, with ideals, with liberal perspectives, that is compassion and belief in egalitarian ideals to a point. I mean, he wasn't socialist, of course, but still, we must remember that he lived in the times where socialism was in its beginnings and when its ideals were still pure because no one tried them. Yeah, okay. When Marx and Engels spoke as the students of Hegel, it was before hundreds or tens of millions perished in Siberia and the gulags or by Mao Zedong and all of their other friends. Still they still have followers, by the way, up to date, which is quite shocking, but never mind that. I guess the people of New York are gonna learn this the hard way. But in the mid 19th century, these ideas were still very charming. Okay, the idea of all people have rights, all people should live with dignity, the idea of giving the people a voice, the idea of compassion to all creations, be it human beings, be it animals, ideals of ethical behavior to other peoples and to other nations. These ideals were sprouting in the mid 19th century, and for many people, it was beautiful. It was really just a moment. It was really a beautiful idea. So the model of a perfect Jew that Rav Hirsch envisioned was really very striking, very beautiful. And indeed, he did receive many followers. Many people wanted to be part of this ideology. For many people, this was a beautiful and fulfilling way of life, despite the fact that, well, as we said, you win some, you lose some. Some of our Jewish brethren will not be part of this ideology because they decided to detach themselves from the life of Torah. When Zionism surfaced, this is where things really got into a turmoil. And now, from this point onwards, we will discuss the impact Zionism had on all of the ideologies that we spoke of up to this point. I want to start with Rav Hirsch, despite the fact that Rav Hirsch passed away in 1888. By the way, it's very easy to remember, which is 8 years before Herzl established the Zionist Foundation. So Rav Hirsch was not aware of the Zionist idea when he passed away. However, proto-Zionist ideas were already part of the rabbinic milieu and rabbinic sermons already in the 30s and 40s of the 19th century. You have rabbis like Rabbi Elkalai and Rav Tzvi Hirsch Kalisher, who already discussed questions of the returning to the land of Israel, of reestablishing the temple, of reviving questions of the land, and so on and so forth. And naturally, at least for one of them, Rav Kalisher, naturally, he went to Rav Hirsch and he said, will you support my ideas? This was in the 60s of the 19th century. Rav Hirsch was already known as a prominent figure, a pillar of German Jewry, specifically Orthodox German Jewry. And Rav Kalisher asked him for his approbation to his book, Drishat Zion. He asked, will you support my ideology? Now, let us be extremely clear. Rav Kalisher was a staunch opposer of Reform Judaism, even more than Rav Hirsch himself. He wrote books against the Reform Judaism. He perceived them as a devastating blow to the Jewish people. So, again, naturally, he believed Rav Hirsch would support his efforts because don't they believe in the same set of beliefs? Don't they pray to the same God 3 times a day, asking for the return to Zion? Don't they bless after eating bread for the reestablishment of the land of Israel, for the reestablishment of the kingdom of David? I mean, it's part of liturgy. It's part of their mutual a war against any reform movement that tries to uproot Jerusalem and the sacrifices from the Siddur, they're supposed to be friends. They're supposed to be comrades in the war, in the endeavor to reunite the people of Israel with their homeland. Yet, surprisingly, Rav Hirsch opposed Rav Kalischer's ideas when it came to Chibat Zion, when it came to the idea of even declaring that it is time to ignite the efforts to return to Zion. Rav Hirsch did not see the return to Zion as something that was critical in his time. Just let me be clear. He wasn't supportive of rephrasing the prayers. He still prayed for Jerusalem. Now, one would ask, if you're praying for Jerusalem and Jerusalem is coming, why don't you embrace the opportunity? Jerusalem is knocking on your door. This is exactly like the Song of Songs, when you see this dance between the wife and the uncle, each and every one of them, when they call to their to their to their spouse or spouse to be. And when they knock on the door, well, I just dressed in my PJs. I'm not ready to open the door. I just put hand cream on my hands. I don't want I don't want them to get dirty. And eventually when the wife does get out of bed and walks to the door, well, the uncle is already not there. So you would expect from someone who's very modern and very acquainted with the national ideas that are rising in Europe throughout the 19th century. That's us just mentioned Otto von Bismarck, of course, the father of German nationalism, not in its vulgar and horrific form, but in a what many would describe as legitimate form of Prussian and German nationalism. You would expect Rav Hirsch to embrace this idea here. The uncle is coming. God is calling us to go back to the land of Israel. But Rav Hirsch says, well, no, we have a job to do here in the diaspora. We need to stay in the diaspora because this is where we can achieve the ideals of impacting humanity in the best way. Now, look, this is really becoming, and I must say, once in a few Shabbatot, I give lessons at my synagogue, and many times I say that I went to rehab in order to seize my addiction to Rav Hirsch. Okay? Because Rav Hirsch writes so beautifully. It's so easy to love his commentaries. He writes beautiful ideas. He's such a talented author. Really, he's so good with words. Really. I'm not mocking. Okay, I'm not cynical. He really is one of the best authors of any commentary on the Torah that I know of. However, and this is where, and this is my personal subjective perspective. Of course, I'm not trying to impose it on anyone. It seems very not in line with his ideals. Rav Hirsch will embrace all of humanity. Rav Hirsch sees his mission to enlighten all of humanity in the great ideals of Torah. But when it comes to his own brothers and sisters that are not observant the same way he is, suddenly he gets seasick. When it comes to the reform movement, Rav Hirsch he feels sick. He has to go to the bathroom. He can't stand it. He can hug and embrace all of humanity. And he sees his divine mission to enlighten humanity. But when it comes to being cooperative with Jews who think a bit otherwise than he does, who behave differently than he does, who do not embrace the same ideals that he does, he is out of the game. Now, I, for one, do not understand this dualism. I'm telling you, and it took me many years, really, to get to a closure with Rav Hirsch's ideas. I love him. I admire him. He really is such a visionary. But this is where I feel that Rav Kalischer's very naive attempt to enlist Rav Hirsch in his efforts and the Natziva Volozhin's criticism of the whole idea of dividing the communities, dividing the Gemeinde, I think you cannot overlook it. Okay, this is very, very problematic. This dualism is it I think it undercovers a flaw, if I dare to say, in Rav Hirsch's ideology. Something here doesn't work. Okay, he created many, many inspiring adherents. Okay, many of his followers were very, very prominent and successful, and really, I mean, very, very famous and quite, I mean, impactful Jews. However, in the long run, he had merely no impact whatsoever on the Jewish people today. Because nowadays, and especially after the establishment of the State of Israel, almost all of his followers abandoned of Hirsch's ship. Some went to the Haredi, to the ultra-Orthodox way of life, remained opposing to Zionism, but giving up on the modern vision and living in a completely non-modern way of life, whereas others, such as many in the kibbutzim established in the state of Israel under Rav Hirsch's vision, such as Kvutzat Sha'alavim and Chafetz Chaim, they just became religious Zionism. They abandoned the vision of the sectarianism and they adopted the Zionist perspective because within the state of Israel, being modern and not being Zionist doesn't go together. Because not being Zionist in the state of Israel usually means being a traditionalist in the very archaic point of view, that is, opposing everything modern, not only Zionism, but everything modern. So would Rav Hirsch be proud of his followers not teaching their children the basics of mathematics, of foreign languages, of biology, or other sciences? I don't think so. In fact, I think he would be ashamed that this is what happened because he believed that a general set of tools and knowledge is an essential part of the upbringing of a perfect Jew. Yet, I also think that Rav Hirsch would not, I know, he would not embrace the Zionist idea because he thinks the Jews have a great mission in the diaspora. Now, it's okay to believe that. Of course, I'm not opposing that. I mean, it's legitimate. But once you try to combine all of these things together, it doesn't stick. There are problems there. Okay, it doesn't always get it doesn't synchronize. And by the way, and this will be my final remark, Rav Hirsch's students were those who established Agudat Israel. In fact, the two most important figures in the establishment of Agudat Israel were Rabbi Yaakov Rosenheim and Reb Shneur Zalman Breuer, and afterwards Rabbi Yitzchak Breuer. Rabbi Yitzchak Breuer, Reb Shneur Zalman Breuer was Rav Hirsch's son-in-law. So these figures, they were the power, the driving force of the establishment of Agudat Israel. But merely 30 to 40 years later, no one even mentioned them, and Agudat Israel became a non-Zionist, Haredi, Hasidic movement that had nothing to do with modernity. So something happened, something there just didn't fit. It's like, I don't know, it didn't work. It didn't work. But still, it doesn't mean that his ideology isn't something that we should learn and study and even admire. I mean, yeah, of course you can, each and every one of us can have their opinions. Okay, we'll conclude here and we'll continue next week. I wish you all a beautiful week and be well and safe and we'll meet again next time. Okay, bye-bye.